Hi, my name is Julie Brown-New. I am a quilt and fiber artist, and I'd like to welcome you to my studio. I'm afraid it's nothing very exciting. It's just a spare bedroom in our house, and of course that means we have no guest room. Sorry, Mom. But at least it's a short walk for me in the morning when I get started work. So come on, let me show you around. Welcome to my studio. The first thing you see when you enter the studio is this big desk, and that is where I'm spending most of my time these days. I do have another job outside of quilting, and that has been my remote office for a long time and will continue to be for a long time going forward. So it is where I'm spending a lot of my time these days. But the rest of the space is dedicated to quilting. I have a fantastic sewing machine that my husband bought for my 40th birthday, and he was very happy to discover it's not nearly as expensive as the bikes that he buys for himself. I have a large design wall, and I will talk about the quilts that are hanging on it in a little bit. And I have a ironing board and cutting station. I have to say that the piece that is hanging above the cutting station I can take no credit for whatsoever. It was a present that I gifted to myself. It's a piece made by a tent maker in Cairo, and the applique is something I can only aspire to. So I am very lucky to have such a wonderfully large space for quilt making. However, one of the things I do love about quilting is that the only thing that's really necessary for quilting is a needle and some thread, some scissors, and some fabric. So one thing you may be wondering as you look around this space with me is, where is all the fabric? If you have a quilter in your life, you may know that we often build up quite significant stashes of fabric, and you may wonder where I'm hiding it. There is some down there under the ironing table and in the cabinets for the cutting table. And you might think that this closet here is filled with fabric, but I hate to disappoint you. It's filled instead, and I will share this mess with you. It is filled instead with finished quilts and mess and books and art supplies and wrapping paper, and as you can see, anything else I could shove in there. So, where is all the fabric? Welcome to my Western studio. As promised, this is where my fabric is kept. I have cabinets here for my entire fabric stash, and whenever I'm working on a project, I just shop from my stash here and bring the fabric that I need back to Boston with me. This is also where I have a collection of antique quilts from my family. The last quilters in my family are a step great-great-grandmother and a great-grandmother on the other side. So when you're the only remaining quilter in the family, you end up with being the family quilt historian. The other thing I want to point out about this studio is this beautiful custom-built sewing table. It's made out of black walnut from trees that my dad actually cut down himself, and then he made the table for me. Many people, when they come into the studio, they say, "Wow, that table is so short." But so am I. So it was made just for my height, and it fits me perfectly. The other thing I love about this table is that there's a leaf on this side of the table that folds out. So if I am working on a quilt and I'm sort of machine quilting and I need something to hold the weight of a big quilt, this leaf folds out and I can double the size of the table, so I have plenty of space to work with. We spend a lot of our weekends out here in the Berkshires, and so I end up doing a lot of my personal quilting here. And so I tend to do more traditional work in this studio, like the two quilts that you see here now. The one on the table is for my sister, the one hanging on the design wall is for me, and I've already delivered an identical one to a cousin of ours. These quilts were inspired by this bright yellow fabric I found at a quilt shop many years ago. It has chickens on it, and it says things like, "Country girls rule," and "Farm chicks are cool." And because the three of us grew up on a farm together along with our other cousin, I bought the bolt in that moment knowing I would eventually make quilts for all of us. The quilt block pattern, this pattern, is sort of a secret message to my sister. The pattern is called, the block name is Hole in the Barn Door. And though I don't think my sister put a hole in the barn door when she was a teenager, I am certain she backed her truck into it. I also have a lot of meaningful pieces out here in the studio. Like up there, those are some feel-good sticks that my daughter made in summer camp that I made the quilted background for to hang. I want to thank you very much for coming to visit me out here in the Berkshires. I'm going to send you back now to Boston for a demo. I hope you enjoyed your visit out west. Now I want to show you a demo of some work that I'm currently doing. I have started a series that I'm calling Botanica that is stitching on top of a photograph that has been digitally printed onto fabric. Let me show you what I'm talking about. This is one of my in-process pieces, what I'm calling a sewn photo. So it starts with an image that I have taken of these beautiful flowers from the Caribbean vacation that I was lucky enough to go on in February before all of this mess started. You can see that I have started sewing on the flowers and a little bit on the ropes. When I'm done, I will have stitched completely over the flowers but left the background unsewn as a way to emphasize the foreground, a way to emphasize the flowers. And here's how I get started with these pieces. I start with a photograph. I print a copy out onto paper so that I can mark different sections of color, from light to dark, and then any sections where there's a little bit of a green tone, I've marked those as well. And I use this as my treasure map, my puzzle guide, as I'm doing the stitching on the photograph that has been printed onto a piece of fabric, a piece of cotton. I pull out a bundle of different threads in all the shades of yellow that I can find, and use those in my stitching. I'll take you over to the machine and show you exactly what I'm talking about now. Okay, here we are at the machine. I've gotten my piece ready to stitch, and I'll show you what I've done is that I have taken a pencil and I have marked the boundary of the space that I plan to sew. So I've marked a pencil line here to indicate this big spot of number 3. When I'm doing my map, I mark out the areas of color, or value, I should say, from lightest number 1 to darkest number 5. I find that 5 different shades is enough to really give the impression of the image without making me crazy trying to find a dozen threads for one piece. So number 3 is kind of the mid-tone, and I've marked the space here, and that's what I'm planning to sew now. So I sidle up to my machine. I have dropped the feed dogs on the machine, and so what that means is that these are the feed dogs here. And normally when you're straight sewing, the feed dogs sort of pull the fabric through underneath the needle. But I don't really want the feed dogs to sort of pull what I'm working on straight, because I'm planning to move in all kinds of different directions. So I've dropped the feed dogs so they're not in my way, and I can move up, back, left, right, without worrying at all. And because I'm going to be making lots and lots of little tiny stitches, I don't have to really worry about making a knot or tying off, or where you sort of pull all of both the back thread, the bobbin thread, up to the front, and you sort of tie a knot and then you sort of bury it. That's really not necessary because I'm going to be making such tiny little stitches. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can see the needle a little bit more closely. And so then what I'm going to be doing is just making lots and lots of little tiny back and forth stitches to fill in the space, like I'm sketching with a pencil. The only thing I really have to think about when I'm doing this is where I want to have an edge that's sort of a hard edge, like right here, the edge of this petal is what I would consider to be a hard edge. But there may be some other areas where I want the colors of the threads to blend a little bit. If I'm, if there's a piece where sort of an area where two colors are coming together and it's not an edge that I want distinction, but I want the colors to meld and to blend. When I have a spot like that, what I'll do is just overlap a little bit each of the colors so that the transition is not so stark. I have the same color thread in my my bobbin, which is the thread that's coming up from the bottom of the sewing machine, as I have in the top. I have the same yellow thread. I don't always worry about that. Sometimes I'll use the same color thread for, the number 3 and the number 4 threads. If they're pretty close, I don't worry about that too much. These just happen to match right now. And that is really it. And I just keep doing these little micro movements over and over and over again until I've colored in the whole space. And then I will, this area I'm coming up into right here, there's a sort of lighter area. It's a number 2 area that I forgot to sew when I was doing number 2 earlier, so I'll feather it a little bit so that the color transition isn't very hard, and I'll come back and put that number 2 thread in later. But this is it. This is the technique I used for my sewn photos. It's sort of meditative, isn't it? So I'll just keep doing that until I filled this number 3 space, and then I will move on to the next number 3. Now, through the wonders of modern television, I have now finished stitching on that entire petal and got a manicure too. So I finished stitching all of the number 3 threads throughout. I added in some green threads for some additional color and shading underneath some of the number 3 threads. Added in that little bit of number 2 thread that I forgot. So this is what a finished petal will look like. Now maybe what I'll do is after I finish doing all of the stitching, I'll come back in and add in some additional highlights or change the shading and coloration a little bit. But that in general is how I do the stitching on these Botanica pieces. Let's head back now to the live stream.